Hey everyone, so today I wanted to talk about how companies create a religion internally around their share price. And I wanted to also bring up the topic of climate change as well, because I think that's a particularly concerning topic in our day and age. So I work as a commercial analyst. I've worked in an economics team, also have an engineering background. So I've done a mix of things before, and also studied the arts as well in my undergrad. So, and I wanted to kind of talk again about how the crossover between, I guess, the religious mentality and the system and capitalism at large kind of works after working inside a large corporation with an energy. So to begin with, if we talk about, let's say, the private sector versus the public sector, if we make a comparison, right? So both of them relatively office jobs, right? Both of them have a salary. However, one of the main differences between the public and the private is that sometimes you'll even see that public sector jobs, they actually pay more in terms of the salary, might even have a higher superannuation, longer leave as well, which makes you think, like, if you had the option of the two, why would you go for a private sector job, right? A lot of the time, however, in private, what they will do is they will give you what's called a matching share plan, which is essentially a ability to buy into the company's shares, right? And it'll be an exclusive deal that is not available to the general public. So it'll be per every dollar that you put in down for buying shares in the company will match that, right? And what happens over time is that the longer you are there and the longer that you are, the longer you move up in the company, the more of your net worth essentially gets tied to the performance of the company. Whereas if you compare that to, let's say, a public sector role, where its performance really is, like, the floor is always there, in the sense that a lot of public sector roles, they get funded through our tax money, as well as through, I guess, other grants from the government, then it's not focused on performance. So that's where you'll find a lot of people are essentially going there for simply their leave benefits. They're a lot older, and essentially it's just hard to get fired in the public sector. And so if you compare this again to private, where over the longer period of time your net worth increases, then you can start to really explain how there is a real cognitive dissonance, or a dissonance between the actions and behaviors of large corporations versus what the public generally think to be good things, right? So now, if we take this idea and we apply it to issues within climate change and environment, you have a classic situation of Greenpeace that campaign against large companies like BP or Shell and challenge their operations because they are trying to get the message out of climate crisis, or the urgency that is required within that space. And to the general public, it almost seems as if, like, why are these companies doing this? Like, we've told them that the Arctic and the ice caps are melting, islands are going underwater every year, the temperature is increasing, and there's a real existential threat to humanity. Yet it almost seems as if these companies and our governments are regressing. And when you look at it from the perspective of the public, you really start to think about, okay, well, I would never do something like that, right? But then when you think about it from the perspective of someone inside the company, your net worth is essentially tied to the performance of the company, right? So from that point of view, you are entirely responsible for ensuring that the company maintains its position in the market. And if you look at it from a bit more of a strategy perspective, right? These large corporations, they actually aren't even concerned with your general public, right? They're concerned about other large competitors competing for resources, right? So if we analyze a gas company, right? They will own a number of assets in the form of process plants and wells, right, which extract gas and then process it and then deliver it to their other industrial customers or the domestic market. They're not concerned with your general public. They're concerned about other gas companies that are vying for the same resources. And the way in which they maintain their power is through what's called the cost of capital, and not risking capital on investments which they are not sure will provide a return. So if we look at energy, for example, again, it's like you might argue, okay, well, we have other forms of energy available. We have renewables like wind, solar, batteries, and those technologies could be invested into. But the problem there, though, is that those technologies are not industrially mature compared to your hydrocarbon-based technologies, right? And on another note, they are also more unpredictable in terms of their throughput compared to reliable forms of hydrocarbons. And so if you take it from the mentality again of someone who is within a private sector company in those sectors, you're asking them to, first of all, risk their net worth. Second of all, to introduce technologies into the business that haven't been proven, as opposed to the option of maintaining the status quo, which is to keep doing what you have always done, which has already proven to work because you are already in a large capitalization organization. And from there, you can really see how the mentality of people within the private sector and large corporations work, right? And then the other religious aspect that is important to consider when we look at these large companies is also the concept of the temple, right? And if you watch any of Professor Zhang's videos, he talks a lot about how temples are essentially a way in which the powerful distance themselves from your everyday person. And you might think that when you come into a company, you represent the whole company. I've had these conversations with people who ask me about, I guess, like the parts of the company that interface with the general public, failing to understand that these large corporations, they have thousands of employees, right? And there's more than likely that they don't know everything about what's going on inside the business. And again, this is the whole idea of temples, right? Because you enter the company, but you are just one cog in the wheel. So to an individual inside the company, they always have someone to report up to. they always have someone that reminds them that the floor only exists for them if the larger cog that they're serving, or the smaller cog that they're serving, functions properly. And so from that mentality, responsibility and authority is always delegated to someone else, right? And if you follow that chain or that ladder, it comes back to the share price, right? Which is the final end all be all, or the market capitalization. And then the last piece of this video, again, is to really talk about how share price is essentially the system in which we all live in, right? So if we take the companies like energy, right, they are considered a reliable, consistent investment asset. And so, if you live in Australia, the majority of your working class will have what's called a superannuation or a retirement fund, right, worth trillions of dollars. And these are other institutions that invest in the equities of your country, right? In energy, if you look at the majority of superannuation companies, they make up about 5 to 10% of any given investment portfolio. So from that perspective as well, you can start to see how, if you are a company that wants to maintain that status, right, you would never introduce risk into the company in which the perceived returns are not high enough to be of reward, essentially. And so I know that there's a lot of ideas which were introduced in this video. If you found it insightful, if you think I'm talking a pile of poo, please let me know in the comments and maybe share any similar insights you have had. And if you found this useful, please feel free to like and subscribe, and let me know if there's any other topics that you want me to talk about. Cheers.